And these two campaigns aren't really just running different visions of the country right now. They actually could be on different planets, and I'll explain right now. Harris is continuing to pitch a vision of economic renewal. Freedom for women is a big issue, and her bipartisan outreach, from the Liz Cheney rally to how they're touting Trump vets for Harris, to news today that Harris has announced she'll bring her message to Fox News, a Trump zone, which further cuts into the claims that she doesn't do enough interviews. She's taking way more adversarial questions than Donald Trump. She will be sitting down for that newsworthy interview with Fox's Bret Baier. More on that in a moment. So that's her message. Trump, meanwhile, is not only pushing lies to try to feed the immigration stories, lies about his own past loss, but a new vow that literally pledges to abuse power and calling Americans who may disagree with him or have a different ideology an enemy, treating them as a foreign danger. I'm going to play you this and explain. This is the kind of blatantly authoritarian rhetoric that's been used to justify government abuse or violence.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen. The enemy from within, in my opinion, is more dangerous than China, Russia, and all these countries.
There it is. It's not the kind of claim the United States can afford to ignore, not when someone awaiting a trial for a coup, if he loses, is blatantly talking about, you heard it, the military as a means to deal with whoever he unilaterally, like a dictator, declares to be the enemy. Quick reminder, you may already know this, it is illegal to use the United States military on the home front inside the borders of the United States against the American citizens. Generals would be duty-bound to defy that request if given it, but we're talking about a candidate now promising that as an option. Tim Walz responding.
And then he crossed the line that I have to tell you, in my lifetime, I would have never imagined, because we know our history. Donald Trump over the weekend was talking about using the U.S. Army against people who disagree with him. Just so you're clear about that, that's you. That's what he's talking about. This is not some mythical thing out there. He called it the enemy within. And to Donald Trump, anybody who doesn't agree with him is the enemy. I tell you that not to make you fearful or anything. I tell you that because we need to whip his butt and put this guy behind us.
A clear statement there, and it could be larger than politics, but some Americans also tend to hear any back and forth between campaigns, even about an issue as grave as this, as politics. So that makes this next piece of big news today pretty important. Trump's campaign is being rocked by the worst kind of rebuke you could get in this October homestretch. A top military general who served then President Trump and held the highest office in the United States military, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, is condemning Trump as a fascist. Let's stop right there. Someone who ascended to the top of the U.S. military, who is traditionally conservative, not in a partisan sense, but in the sense of being a lifelong general, is saying and warning before the election Donald Trump is a fascist. Quote, "No one has ever been as dangerous to this country as Trump. Now I realize he's a total fascist," Milley says. This is a statement that's breaking as news now from the new Bob Woodward book. He's the most dangerous person to this country, says the general. Now, the authoritarian tactic of calling citizens enemies is well known. If you study history, it is dark and scary for what often comes with it, because it's used to justify abuse or violence that a society might not otherwise tolerate against its own people. It's an effort to separate us so that our own people are no longer seen as our own people. And it is that simple. Donald Trump has famously called journalists the enemy of the people. He lied about his own loss. He lied about made-up fraud, and then he uses those lies about fraud to threaten lawyers, party donors, elections officials with prison if he wins, vowing to prosecute them for the thing that didn't happen that he lies about. It's not just generals who many Americans may not completely know by name, but who they value. Many Americans value when someone who's been a general, risked life and limb for their country, gives such a rare warning. I can't think of the last time a member of the Joint Chiefs called any politician, let alone someone who was a presidential nominee, a fascist. But other names right now may also echo for what the Harris campaign wants to do. Take a longtime Trump ally and a very famous person, Geraldo Rivera, who's had many stints on TV, I'm sure you know that, including on Fox News, now endorsing Kamala Harris. If you are a Republican, Donald Trump has made a liar of you. Trump stabbed the Constitution in the back, he writes, and also used his platform, this very newsworthy statement, Breaking with Trump, to tell MAGA fans that the Trump big lie about the election will make you a liar. Former President Trump is a sore loser who cannot be trusted to honor the Constitution. That's why I'm voting for Kamala Harris. Again, another name from the center right or the far right or the general conservative military, all of these coming together for Harris. And she is announcing this new interview today with Rivera's old network, Fox News. I mentioned I'd tell you a bit more about this. We checked. It's her first sit down with Fox News ever. She will talk to Bret Baier on Wednesday. And we are all news competitors here, but I would say that is a newsworthy interview, no way around it. And it continues the Harris media blitz that has shredded the GOP talking points that she doesn't do interviews. You don't have to watch all these. You don't have to watch this show. There's freedom in America. But we put up a couple of these boxes to remind you she's doing traditions like 60 Minutes, which Trump has ducked. She's doing The View. She did Howard Stern to reach a different demographic. She did a new podcast, Call Her Daddy, which if you haven't heard of, I can tell you many other people have because it has about 10 million listeners, more than Fox News, which she's now doing next week. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is staying in something of his own echo chamber and then projecting, accusing Harris of what he's actually doing, not taking any tough questions. Kamala Harris going to Fox is one more piece of a media blitz that is striking. We will be watching that interview. You may or may not, right? Like I said, people are free to watch or not watch anything they want. But a heck of a lot of people who've heard a heck of a lot of things about Biden and Harris on that network are now going to hear directly from her. Another high-stakes moment in this packed race with 22 days to go.